One winter break night, I found myself home alone, seated in our sunroom, which doubles as our family movie area. It has a door that opens to the side driveway. With the blinds drawn, I was cozy under a blanket, engrossed in a movie, although I can't recall which one. Suddenly, the outside lights flickered on. We had a motion-sensing light there, so its activation felt unsettling. I lowered the TV volume to listen for any unusual noises outside. It was unlikely I could hear anything, so I cautiously lifted the blinds for a quick peek. The view revealed nothing alarming. Unfortunately, there was no way to turn off that light, which was annoying, but I decided to wait it out, assuming it was just a raccoon or possum setting it off. But the more I thought about it, the less plausible that seemed. To reassure myself, I put on my shoes and ventured out to the driveway. I discovered no one was there, allowing me to return to the sunroom feeling more at ease. Time passed, but then I heard a bucket clattering outside, followed by the motion light turning back on. My initial concern transformed into outright fear. Something or someone was lurking out there. I hoped it might be an animal, but I was beginning to doubt that. Getting up felt risky. The couch created a blind spot from the door, and the thought of someone standing there terrified me. I contemplated turning off the TV, but the remote lay in the middle of the coffee table. Even that small movement felt daunting. I glanced at the blinds, fully drawn, but focused on a shape behind them. I noticed a distinct outline of a person outside, arms slightly spread. Words cannot capture the sheer dread I felt then. My heart raced, and it felt challenging to breathe, fear coursing through me. I quietly rose from the couch, but, as I neared the door separating the sunroom from the dining room, the figure began knocking aggressively on the glass. Desperate to scare them off, I cried out shakily and dialed 911. I paused to listen for their response, and they suddenly fell silent, but I spotted the shadow moving towards the door. Facing me now was a frail, old woman with wild hair. Momentarily, my fear lessened, but it quickly escalated as she started banging on the door, screaming like a madwoman. I rushed to slam the door shut and called the police. I reported an elderly woman attempting to break in. The operator instructed me to hide in a secure area with something to defend myself until they arrived. A nightmare unfolded when I heard glass breaking from the bathroom. A minute passed, and after not hearing anything, I carefully unlocked the bathroom door. Peering into the living room, there she was, the crazy old woman, standing amidst the shards of a window she had broken. She spotted me and dashed towards the doorway. Panic surged through me, and I screamed like the scared 17-year-old I was, slamming the door again. The old woman continued pounding on the door, mumbling incomprehensibly. Tears streamed down my face as I begged her to leave. Suddenly, I heard a loud bang at the front door. I opened the bathroom window and shouted for help. 2 officers responded, assuring me they would crawl through the broken window outside. The knocking ceased as chaos erupted outside. I listened intently as I heard the police order the woman to step away from the door. When I left the bathroom, I found the 2 officers successfully detaining her. She looked at me with wild eyes, and I quickly looked away. It turned out she lived nearby, often cared for by a woman who never left her house. The neighbors seldom saw her, and the elderly lady was clearly in need of special care. My parents pressed charges against her caretaker for negligence, yet we lost the lawsuit. At least the old woman was removed from our neighborhood and taken to a treatment facility. I own a modest home on expansive land in rural New York, visiting several times each winter for skiing. One neighbor remains a stranger. I've never spoken to them. Our properties are divided by a fence, and wooded areas stretch for miles around. There's another neighbor across the street I've met while skiing, and we've gotten to know each other that way. Last January, I made my first visit of the season. Upon entering, I heard what sounded like a child laughing from the direction of the neighbor's house. Surprised they had kids, I found the first night back always strange after my home being empty for most of the year. I needed to switch on the water and heat again. After enjoying a good night's sleep, I woke up, made breakfast, and got ready for skiing. When I stepped outside, I spotted a big red ball sitting in the snow on my front lawn. It hadn't been there the day before, so I assumed it belonged to the neighbors. I tossed it over the fence and headed to the ski lodge to meet my friends. Returning later that evening, I noticed the ball was back on my front lawn after having dinner with friends. Growing puzzled but undeterred, I tossed it back over again. Later that night, I woke to the sound of children's laughter at around 2 a.m. Confused by the time, I went to my window but saw no kids. Gradually, the laughter faded. Looking out, I noticed the red ball again sitting in the same spot on my lawn. A chill ran down my spine. This time, instead of throwing it outside, I brought it inside and went back to sleep, relieved that the laughter didn't return. The next morning, before skiing again, I finally knocked on my neighbor's door to introduce myself. To my surprise, it opened to an elderly gentleman who appeared innocent. I inquired about the laughter and the ball reappearing on my lawn, but he claimed there were no children nearby. Once again, chills coursed through me. Thanking him, I returned home, leaving the red ball in my living room before heading for another ski day with my friends. Exhausted after that day, I tossed my gear onto the couch and planned to pack everything later. I crashed into bed, but once again, children's laughter woke me. Startled, I rushed to the window only to find the red ball sitting in the snow again. I tore through the living room, looking for the ball I was sure I had left there, but it had vanished. A growing unease enveloped me. I turned on every light while packing my wet gear into a bag, preparing for anything unexpected. All doors and windows showed to be locked. I felt uneasy. The lights remained on while I retreated to my room. As I glanced outside, something caught my eye. A child stood eerily still in the snow, staring toward my window. My instincts kicked in, and I ducked, shutting the blinds of every window in the house, desperately trying to suppress my fear. It took some time, but eventually exhaustion prevailed, and I drifted into sleep. The following morning, I skipped breakfast, packed up my car, and left, never looking back at the red ball still sitting on my front lawn. I had never experienced theft in that house before and was relieved to leave the situation behind. I still can't fathom how that child, or anyone, managed to enter my home to take the ball. The incident left me haunted, but the most chilling part of it all was that child standing outside alone in the cold snow at midnight. If the ball hadn't mysteriously left my living room, I can only imagine how different things might have turned out. My roommate George and I became acquainted through work. We carpooled daily, living just 15 minutes from the office. Recently, a new neighbor moved in just 2 weeks ago. We never witnessed him unpacking or even saw what he looked like, not sure if he was a man or a woman. Eventually, we confirmed his identity, luckily discovering he was a man. On the third day, George and I approached next door for a friendly introduction, but he didn't answer the door. His car was parked in the driveway, so he assumed he must be busy. As we walked back down the driveway, George whispered for me to look at the window by the door. Investigating, I spotted a man creepily holding the blinds open, staring out at us. Exchanging glances, we silently agreed this neighbor was going to be awkward. That night, around 1 a.m., I began hearing strange noises outside. Given our constant warm climate, my windows were open, making the sounds clearer. I peeked outside from my upstairs room, overlooking the neighbor's backyard. To my disbelief, I spotted the man, a bulky figure clad in a hoodie, sawing a massive piece of wood. The bizarre scene warranted a trip to George's door. He was also awake, disturbed by the racket. With early work commitments, both of us found his actions absurd. After some time deliberating, we decided to kindly request he stop. Knocking on the gate rather than the door, we expected him to answer, but the sawing halted unexpectedly. At least the noise had ceased, so we returned to bed. A few nights later, we were awakened again by commotion. As I stayed attentive to the disturbance, it soon morphed into distinct screams. Looking out the window, I was horrified to see the neighbor hurriedly re-entering his house while dragging something peculiar. Locking eyes with him through the window registered sheer panic. I immediately dashed to George's door, who was already receiving the police on the line to report the situation. I remained by his side, listening intently. Suddenly, a loud bang resonated downstairs, the sound of the back door slamming. Our expressions mirrored horror as George yelled, instructing the dispatcher to send help. Our neighbor had just entered our house. I ventured to the edge of the hallway and peeked over the stairs. I could hear shifting floorboards below. Cautiously, I slipped back to George's room, shutting the door behind me. He continued relaying our emergency to the police, while we braced ourselves against the door. Footsteps quickly climbed the stairs, and the bathroom door swung open. A frantic race ensued as the man dashed toward George's door. We exerted every ounce of strength to hold it shut, the man's purpose unclear. Suddenly, he retreated downstairs, plunging us into silence. Minutes dragged by before we finally dared to open the door, only to find the hallway empty. Then we heard a commanding voice shouting, "Police!" George and I rushed downstairs, colliding with relief. However, someone loomed behind our dining room table. I told George to sprint upstairs again as the person hiding sprang up, chasing us. We dashed into the bathroom, locking the door as we trembled in fear. But the tension didn't last long. Once more we heard police officers announce their presence. The man banging at our door fell quiet. George and I shouted to the officers for assistance. They bounded up the stairs, demanding the man drop his weapon. We heard a knife clatter to the floor, and as prompted, we emerged from the bathroom. The police took him outside, cuffing him before placing him in the back of a cruiser. Reporting screams issued from the neighbor's house, prompting the officers to enter with weapons drawn. In mere moments, more cop cars arrived on the scene. Shock resonated through us when officers emerged from next door leading a woman sobbing inconsolably. She had been trapped in his basement, screaming for aid as she pressed against the door. They also uncovered the body stuffed in the bag the man had dragged from his backyard. While the whole story remained vague, we suspected he would face serious consequences. Now that house is back on the rental market, our hope is for someone perfectly normal to move in.